Well, good morning and welcome to another wee video. I thought that given everybody has plenty of time on their hands in lockdown, I'd make this video dedicated to the true use of time. And the true use of time, of course, is to learn how to use it. I think if I was to put the scenario forward that time between the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end, can be billions and billions of years, and then superimpose upon that the idea of participation as an eternal being, respawning or remanifesting an imagery of itself again and again and again. And I don't want to use the word reincarnation because it's loaded in many things throughout the beginning to the beginning and the end. If I was to put that to you, most people would look at me with horror in their eyes and be like, oh my God, no, I couldn't possibly go through billions more years of this nonsense. And that's one of the perspectives that drew me into to spirituality, was looking at the potential for spiritual perspectives that impact my life, that impact my thinking. And the idea that I'm eternal and that I'm going to have to participate in the entirety of the schism of time and space, even as a form manifest, as this avatar, was kind of intolerable. I thought, no, I didn't want to do that. And even before I came into contact with sort of wider reaching or more open-minded spiritual perspectives on things, even from my very human perspective of my own life, I didn't want to participate in it. And tried to end it, which failed and led me to my great spiritual quest, I guess you'd call it, my crusade. So learning to use time then is learning to collapse the time between the alpha and the omega, and the way that that's accomplished in spiritual thinking. And when I say spiritual thinking, what I'm talking about is the thinking that is employed as an application of principles during a period of going from an idea of myself as being this avatar to a realization of self as being whole and perfect, as created, as being spirit. And there's this transition where everything gets reinterpreted, and it's a bit like this, and sometimes it's like this, and it's all over the place really, but just keep going. So learning to collapse time, because the idea of participating between alpha and omega is really horrific. And I've had people say to me, oh yeah, but you don't remember your last incarnation, you don't remember who you were in your last thing and all this sort of nonsense. And it's like, I look out into the sea of experience that the world presents me, and it's intolerable to even consider that one brother, one anything, anywhere, needs suffer because of my manifestation of it in this incarnation, let alone whatever may or may not have happened or transpired, illusory or otherwise, in any other. So learning then to accept atonement or oneness for myself within the framework of time and space, to collapse that time into the here and the now, wherein I can transcend the physical nature of time and space through an experience of opening my mind through the Holy Spirit. Oh, I've got some little birds joining me here in the early morning. I don't know if you can see them there, but probably the sun. We have a lot of little finches and things around here in the mornings, which is beautiful. Little red-breasted finches, little red beaks and little red chests. But anyway, the idea of participating in time and space in its entirety is abominable. And so all effort is then, by me anyway, as a spiritual aspirant, I guess, a teacher and student of life, put in to taking responsibility for my time and space experience and collapsing it through a willingness to forgive myself for my association, false association with it. So the opportunities then, because the world is a classroom, the world is a place where you can learn that it is better to give than to receive, although giving and receiving are the same. The opportunities then are presented through relationships. And when I become willing, and I'm saying I because I like to try and keep things singular, when I become willing in any given relationship to look at the conflict I find within it in my own mind as being me responsible for it, rather than, no, it's partly your fault and partly my fault, because there is no your and my, there's only I. When I become willing to take total responsibility for that and heal my own mind of my thoughts about it, then what I'm doing is healing or releasing a claim on my old identity as being this avatar, and allowing an open space to come in, to form inside me, let's say, or in my consciousness, wherein the Holy Spirit can flow and replace what once was an attack defense posture in my own thinking with a sense of self and inner peace and all of those things that come with that kind of appeal of the heart. So a lot of mosquitoes here too. So relationships are learning tools. We've got the alpha and the omega, and a lesson repeats until it is learned. What you resist persists. So you will often find, or I will often find, see how tricky that is? I will often find that the same kind of scenarios show up in relationships again and again. The same, let's say, bickering, if I have an example, bickering or arguing about things, or hopefully not, but perhaps it elevates to a violent kind of, encounter. But in learning then to take responsibility and drop the defense, to drop the attack and defense mentality that perpetuates the bickering. Right? Now, in me, I don't know how to do that. All I've ever done is justify my old position of myself within the world based on my ideas that I am this thing that is frail and destined for the grave. That is my overlearned perspective, and it's validated by every thought I hold about it, by every thought I hold about myself as this, which is why an experience of self, of higher self, of spiritual self, the transcendental experience, is so essential, because without that experience, there's no other reference point for what it is that I am. And that experience is gained through the prayer of the heart in asking, and the willingness to be still and to know that I am God, the willingness to be, and that's a biblical quotation, but the willingness to be still and allow the experience to happen. Now, that experience is not something that happens at the end of a 30 or 40 year spiritual quest. It happens like that, right here and now. And the depth to which I will allow myself to undergo the witness to the experience depends upon the integrity that I have with offering my whole world for healing. And I'm familiar with an idea that was presented to me early on in my own healing process by one of my teachers, who said, you don't really want to give up the world and follow me, which is another biblical quotation by Jesus, which has to be done in its entirety. You only want to give up the bad stuff and keep the good stuff. Well, you can't. You have to give up the yin and the yang. You have to give up all of it. You have to be willing to question the entirety of it, release the entirety of it, and have the entirety of it be replaced with truth. And no truth can be found out in the world. So if you haven't figured that out yet, maybe you're a bit early watching watching this video. But There is no truth in the world. Truth exists only within you, which is why if you're still clinging to television, watching for some world leader or someone somewhere to say something that makes sense, you'll be watching for a very long time and end up with these funny little things like I have. But so learning then to collapse time. A lesson repeats until it is learned, and you can see through the cyclical nature of the cause and effect relationships that you find yourself in where the lessons are. They're obvious. If you're honest with yourself, it's like, oh man, this pisses me off, this triggers me, pushes my buttons, whatever it is you want to say. It signifies that I have a block to wanting to be aware of love's presence within myself. Any trigger, any block, any button rather, is an indicator that I am still living from and still operating consciously from a split-minded perspective of myself, where on one hand, during the transition from being temporally associated to spiritually aligned, I still value something on the temporal side. I still hold something in the world. I want to be right about something, or there's something, a grain of sand here on the beach that I really like, which validates the whole world. So the purification of the mind then, which is what the spiritual transition from one false identity to truth is, necessitates that I be willing to open all my relationships, all my thinking to the light of truth, or the reason, the light of reason, I guess. You know, you want to make light of it. Does that make sense? So the cyclical nature of relationships gives a great opportunity to look, oh, not this again. All right, let me put my finger on my nose and accept that what I'm seeing out there is my mirror. What I'm seeing out there is an opportunity for me to heal another fractured piece of the mirror that I broke in my original idea, or my original will to be separate from the whole. The mirror once was whole. It showed me a clear and perfect reflection of myself. And now all I see is fractions and fragments of a smashed mirror, a confusion of my identity about myself in everyone and everything. And everyone and everything will play a part for me to show me something about myself until that mirror is completely re-veneered, if you like, or healed. And the healing comes about through the recognition that there was no smashed mirror anyway. That sounds paradoxical, I know, but forgiveness is required to reach an eventual event horizon perspective point within your own mind where you can see for yourself that there was never really anything to forgive. An illusion is an illusion. It has no truth. It has no validity. And it's only my meaning that I've given everything I think I see out in the world that causes me to react to it. I hope that's clear. So whilst you're in lockdown, or whilst I'm in lockdown, being willing then to be vigilant for my own state of inner peace, for my own Om state, my own karmic association with myself as well, when that state is disturbed, and to be honest about it. It's like, well, I see that niggly little, and it only has to be a tiny little, you know, that's all it needs. That's the tip of an iceberg over intense rage and fury. You know, and if you don't believe me, just sit with it for a while and let it build. I mean, whatever it takes, right? You have to bang your head against the wall until you finally realize that that's not getting you anything. And the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So learning then to see your cycles, or to see my cycles. I become willing to see my cycles more as I become less willing to undergo ongoing stress, ongoing frustration, ongoing anxiety, right? And all anxiety is separation anxiety. I think I'm separate from God. Where is God? What is God? Is there really a God? Why doesn't God save us from this pandemic? All of that, right? The realization then that God is within myself, and I have to find God first, that God is not pushing me away from him. I am the one who chose originally to be separate by my own free will. And therefore, by a choice of my own free will again, I must now re-choose, or choose again, in all things that show up that tempt me to believe that I am separate from someone or something and not whole in the world, as above, so below, have to be healed. The purification of the mind has to happen. The journey of the heart will lead you to the education of the purification of the mind. If you're still out there following your heart, doing all of that beautiful stuff, that's awesome. I love it. I did that. I once made a decision in my life that I would never again do anything that didn't bring me happiness. And I listened to that voice in me that made decisions. No, not that. Yes, I'll do this. And eventually I was led to the brick wall again. I found myself joining the Rainbow Tribe, having long dreadlocks and living in a teepee for a moment there, and doing all of that, and realised that all I'd done in my following of the heart was to change the form of how things looked for me, but I still took my same old mind into that equation. I realised then that I had to do something with the shrieking banshee that was going on in my head. And that became something that meditation and prayer would take care of in due course as I became willing to heal and to be healed. And so the use of time then is really the most important thing in considering what it is that I should be about, especially since we're in lockdown and I have nothing else to do other than to make these little declarative, I don't know how to say it, declaring, witnessing videos, and to offer this alternative to the rigors of time and space, which, you know, when you look at it, it's nothing, but it seems to be horrific. When you can step beyond the physical nature of self and look back as an eternal being and see that you've just simply been participating, or I've been participating in a dream or in an illusion, and I'm now awake within my dream, awake within the illusion, finding myself still with the use of this avatar, but not as the avatar. When you can reach that point, it's really quite nice. The observer. And it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're sitting in the bush here in Australia or whether you're in New York City dealing with your mask on, or all of these sorts of things. Like, the idea of being supported from within is a true one when it's become your own experience, when I have it as my own experience and I carry that with me. This is why the experience is essential. There has to be another reference point in your thinking for what it is that you are, other than the thoughts and ideas that exist in the conscious realm, because the conscious realm is simply the domain of the ego, and the ego is not my friend. Right, so spirituality then is really tricking the ego into deciding against itself. It's using its own tricks and you know, suspicions and viciousness and all of that sort of stuff. And one of the most beautiful things about it is that in the transition, in the idea of giving up the world, the good and the bad, because it is an illusion either way, nothing is actually lost. And I find myself on this side of the willingness to forgive or to let go and release temporal association, perhaps lamenting what I think I might lose. But on the other side, realizing there is no loss, that I'm still whole inside, and I don't feel as if I need to validate myself outside with possessions and power and prestige and all of these sorts of things, so that I can maintain my sense of self and what I think I'm worth and all that sort of stuff, which is really very groovy. There is no loss in God. And I actually once had somebody say to me on Facebook in response to something that to live a life in faith is madness. Why would you put your faith in something you cannot see? And my response was, well, go ahead, put your faith in everything that you can see. Do it totally. See how that works out for you. All right, so learn to use time. If you don't have a copy of A Course in Miracles, get on my website. I'll post the link up above or down below, wherever it ends up. And there is a free PDF download of A Course in Miracles in the resources section of the website. Download it onto your phone and start reading it. And then halfway through that download, there is a lessons book, and you can start doing the lessons for your mind training. One lesson a day, which goes for a whole year. And at the end of that whole year, I guarantee you'll be somewhat different in your perception of yourself than when you started at year's beginning. So I guess the beginning point in any spiritual journey, though, is to make that connection with spirit, to have an experience, and that happens through prayer. So the prayer of the heart for the healing of the mind that believes it is separate from God. And I've had many people that will say to me, well, I don't believe I'm separate from God. I think God's in everything. Concepts. You have to have an experience. Forget about all your beliefs. Beliefs are nothing. Experience is essential. Essential. And I'm not talking about a worldly experience. I'm not talking about how good you are when you went to some Course in Miracles conference, how good you felt and how it made you feel coming out of there high as a kite. Any release of endorphins and dopamine does that. I'm talking about seeing the world in front of your eyes vanish, your body disappear, and finding yourself in a completely non-dimensional experience of yourself that is pure light. That's probably a very bad way of even describing it. All right, I love you. Take it easy. Invite the Holy Spirit in. The light does the work. Stop trying to struggle with it, Dave. And I don't struggle with it so much anymore. Let the light do the work. Let God take care of it. But first, make that connection. Open that channel through the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit of Wholeness, or the Boom Chanka Tube, whatever you want to call it. And I love in the story of A Course in Miracles where Helen Schuckman had the realization during her period where she was channeling the Course that she was a channel, and that the channel had got clogged up. Each of us is a channel, and the channel is clogged up. I am a channel, and the channel is clogged up. But having made significant effort, I guess, into the healing and the unclogging of that channel, and it's got nothing to do with chakras. Forget it. The spiritual awakening has nothing to do with the activation of glands in and out of the body. That's nonsense, right? Just because a billion people believe in some kind of system, it's like astrology, the stars. It's nonsense. Just because somebody looked up and saw stars and connected the dots and said this happens and that happens and a million, of course, because mind has power to give meaning to thoughts. And if you believe in it, you'll make it so for yourself by your projection of what you want to be true for you onto it. But it doesn't mean that it's true, right? Spiritual awakening is a decision in the mind. Spiritual awakening is an activation or an action of mind that is here and now. Thank you. Within you. And it always brings joy, right? It's accumulative. It brings joy, it brings happiness, it brings peace to you when you're able to simply be still and know that you are God. All right, take it easy.